When my phone buzzed with Rob's name flashing on the screen, I had an odd sense that he needed more than just a quick catch-up. My brother wasn't one to call out of the blue unless something important was up. I picked up, wondering if everything was okay. "Hey, Jess," he greeted, but there was something in his voice. Hesitancy, maybe a touch of vulnerability. "Rob, what's going on?" I asked, a small smile creeping into my voice. In the back of my mind, I pictured him on the other end, fumbling over his words, a habit that hadn't left him since high school. "Listen, I hate to ask, but I need a favor. It's about Danny." There was an immediate pang of concern. "Is he okay?" Yeah, he's fine," he assured me, though his voice still held a note of strain. "I've got this conference in Chicago. It's a week long. Mandatory. Danny's, he's technically old enough to stay alone, but..." He trailed off, the silence filling the space between us as I pieced together what he wasn't quite saying. Rob and Danny had been on their own for years since Danny's mom passed away. Rob had always been fiercely protective of him, especially now that Danny was 21 and moving into adulthood. Rob gave Danny space, but I knew he still worried, and maybe part of him wasn't ready to let Danny navigate things solo just yet. "But you'd feel better if someone were around," I finished for him gently, sensing his relief through the phone. "Exactly, I'd just feel better, His voice softened. "Jess, he's just been through a lot lately. I'd rest easier if he had someone looking out for him. And you're the only one I trust with that." I paused, letting the moment sink in. Danny and I hadn't had much time together in the last few years, not since he'd gone off to college. College life swept him up, and he'd changed so much. I could tell from the occasional family gatherings that he was quieter, more reserved. He was growing up, going through his own transformations. I'd miss the kid I used to see every week. "Of course, Rob," I replied, warmth softening my voice. "I'd love to spend time with Danny. Send him over whenever he's ready." "Thank you, Jess. Really, this means a lot to me. I'll make sure he knows it's no trouble for you." "Come on, Rob. He's my nephew. It's no trouble at all," I said, laughing softly. After a few more rounds of thanks and an obligatory exchange of family gossip, we hung up. Sitting back, I couldn't help but feel a mixture of anticipation and nostalgia. It had been so long since I'd spent real time with Danny. A week together would be more than a visit. It would be a chance to reconnect. The next afternoon, I was busy straightening up the guest room when I heard a tentative knock at the door. I hurried over, pulling it open to find Danny standing there, suitcase in hand, giving me a soft smile that looked equal parts warm and uncertain. "Hey, Aunt Jess," he greeted, his voice deeper than I remembered, with an edge of awkwardness that made me smile. "Hey," I said, pulling him into a hug before he could protest. I felt him stiffen at first, but after a moment he relaxed, hugging me back. His arms had grown stronger, and he'd shot up a few inches taller than me. He wasn't the little boy I remembered from family cookouts and holiday get-togethers. He was growing into himself, someone I was just beginning to recognize. "Come on in. Let me show you around," I said, motioning for him to follow me inside. As I led him down the hallway, I pointed out the essentials as if I were showing off a hotel suite. "Here's the guest room, where you'll be staying. Fresh towels in the closet, bathroom just down the hall, and of course the kitchen. Mi casa es su casa," I added with a grin, trying to make him feel at home. He chuckled, though a bit awkwardly, and set his suitcase down inside the room. As he looked around, I could sense his discomfort. It was the kind of hesitation I'd seen in him as a kid whenever he was in a new place, somewhere he didn't yet feel like he belonged. He was still adjusting, I realized, probably feeling the same strangeness of being here as I felt having him here. I left him to unpack, not wanting to hover, and returned to the kitchen where I'd set out a few snacks. I went through my emails and tried to focus, but I couldn't help but glance down the hallway every time I heard a creak of footsteps. Eventually, Danny wandered out of the room, looking a little more relaxed, though still wary. "Hungry?" I asked, gesturing toward the counter. "Yeah, I could eat," he replied, his voice soft as he reached for a sandwich. He looked at me, a shy smile playing on his lips as he took a bite. We sat at the kitchen table, munching quietly, the awkward silence lingering as he seemed more interested in his sandwich than in talking. I could tell he was still feeling things out, so I didn't push. After he'd finished, he leaned back in his chair, looking around the kitchen, taking it in as if seeing it for the first time. "This is nice, Aunt Jess," he said finally, his voice hesitant but sincere. "Thank you. I try to keep it cozy." I chuckled, glancing around at the mismatched chairs and the small table that had been my refuge for many a solitary dinner. "It's nothing fancy, but it's home." He nodded, his expression thoughtful. I could see a bit of tension melting away, though I knew it would take some time for him to feel truly comfortable. That evening, we fell into a quiet routine. I suggested we watch a movie, a sci-fi classic I remembered he loved, and we settled on the couch with a big blanket. He sat at one end, leaving a respectful distance, but as the movie went on, I noticed him relaxing, sinking into the couch. A few times, he even looked over at me, catching my eye with a faint smile before quickly looking away, almost embarrassed. My heart raced, watching Danny lounging on the couch, his muscular frame stretched out in just gym shorts and a tight tank. Having my teenage nephew staying with me was awakening thoughts that made me squirm. I couldn't help noticing how he'd grown into his father Rob's good looks. The next morning, I knocked on his door gently. "Danny, I'm making breakfast. Pancakes, your favorite." A few minutes later, he wandered out, his hair sticking up in random directions. He gave me a sheepish smile, rubbing the back of his neck as he sat at the table. "These look amazing, Aunt Jess. Thanks," he said, a little shyly, and dug in. I watched him, feeling a warm sense of nostalgia. "I thought you might still like pancakes," I said, smiling. "They were always your favorite when you were little." He paused, swallowing a mouthful before nodding. "They still are. These are great." As he ate, I could tell he was beginning to feel more at home, letting down his guard bit by bit. I decided to ask him about college, hoping to get a sense of what his life was like these days. "So, how's school going? How's the big college experience?" I asked, trying to keep my tone casual. He shrugged, pushing his pancake around his plate with his fork. "It's okay, I guess. Classes are tough. I'm not sure what I want to do yet, so it feels like I'm just kind of floating." "Floating isn't always a bad thing," I offered gently. "Sometimes you need a little time to figure out what matters most." He looked up at me, his gaze a little more open, a hint of relief in his expression. "I guess. But it's hard, you know? It feels like everyone around me has it all figured out, and I'm just stuck." I reached over, placing a comforting hand on his. "Danny, no one has it all figured out. Trust me. You're not alone in that." His shoulders relaxed, and a small, grateful smile tugged at his lips. "Thanks, Aunt Jess. That actually helps." For the rest of the day, I could sense a shift in him. He started talking more, telling me about his friends, his classes, even some of the struggles he'd been keeping to himself. I listened, asking a question here and there, but mostly just letting him vent. He seemed grateful for it, like he needed someone to hear him without judging. "I'm gonna hop in the shower, Danny," I called out casually later that afternoon, though my voice quivered slightly. Was I imagining how his eyes followed me? "Make yourself at home." "Thanks, Aunt Jess," he replied, gaze lingering on my legs beneath my short sundress. Upstairs, I took off my clothes. The mirror reflected my toned body. Years of yoga had kept me looking good at 35. The hot water felt amazing as I stepped under the spray. Steam filled the glass enclosure as I worked shampoo into my long hair, eyes closed. My hands slid over my slick skin, remembering Danny's hungry stares. I shouldn't be thinking about my nephew while washing myself like this. The bathroom door creaked. My eyes flew open to find Danny frozen in the doorway, wearing just those thin shorts. "Wow," he said, his hand adjusting. I should cover myself, should tell him to leave. Instead, I turned to face him fully, letting him drink in the view. Water ran between my body and down my flat stomach. "Danny," I whispered, watching him adjust slowly. Sorry, I shouldn't be looking," he groaned. My hand drifted down my stomach of its own accord. His breathing grew heavy as he adjusted again. He turned and ran away embarrassed. "Sorry," he shouted. Slightly disappointed, I cleaned off and went to my room to change. By the next day, Danny felt like he was fully settling in, but the awkwardness caught him off guard a couple times as his nerves shone through. I couldn't help but think of yesterday when he caught him humming to himself in the hallway, and later that morning he wandered into the kitchen while I was making lunch, offering to help chop vegetables. We worked side by side, and I felt a growing ease between us, like the walls he'd had up were slowly dissolving, but the tension was growing. I couldn't help but think of yesterday with the shower. I was getting excited that a young man found me attractive, but my nephew. It was so wrong, but so right. I said to him again, I was going to have another shower. I wanted to see if he would watch again. I went upstairs, took my towel, and back into the bathroom. I stepped under the hot water again. My skin flushed, remembering Danny's reaction. Without thinking, my hands drifted across my body. A few minutes passed. The stairs creaked and then the door. I looked up again to see him grinning, looking at my body under the hot water. I guided him through the next 15 minutes. It was magic. I went to my bedroom, amazed at what had just happened, still warm. I just left him in the bathroom to gather his thoughts of what just happened. I went to bed that night, feeling incredible, however fully aware this was very, very wrong. The next morning, we both tried to distract last night's events and talk about our lives while we ate breakfast. "So, what's been the hardest part of college for you?" I asked, genuinely curious. "Honestly," he sighed, glancing at the carrots he was chopping. "I think it's just feeling alone. There are so many people around, but I still feel like an outsider sometimes." His words tugged at my heart. That makes sense. College can be a lonely place, even when you're surrounded by people. He nodded, seeming to appreciate the understanding. I thought I'd have it all figured out by now, you know. Like when I was younger, I thought being 21 would mean I'd have my life all set. But I'm just lost. I placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "Danny, it's okay to be lost. It's part of finding your way." He looked up at me, his expression softening, and nodded. We continued cooking in comfortable silence, and I felt a deep sense of connection that reminded me of the closeness we'd had when he was a child. That night after dinner, we sat out on the porch watching the stars. Danny seemed pensive, his gaze fixed on the sky, and I waited, sensing he had something on his mind. "Aunt Jess," he said finally, his voice quiet, "do you ever feel like you're just not enough?" His question took me by surprise, and I felt a pang of empathy. "All the time, Danny," I admitted, looking out at the stars. "I think everyone feels that way, even if they don't say it. But you are enough, exactly as you are." He turned to me, his eyes filled with a mix of relief and gratitude. "Can't believe it's my last night here already," Danny sighed, sprawling on the couch beside me. His muscular arm brushed mine, sending shivers through me. I know, but I have something special planned if you want to take the events of the other day further." He looked shocked and surprised, speechless. "Remember Rachel, my yoga friend I told you about?" He nodded, looking nervous. "The redhead from your photos?" His eyes darkened with interest. "The very same. We've been messaging about you, and she wants to see you." I leaned in close, whispering, "She loves younger guys. Shall I invite her over?" He nodded again, speechless. "Sometimes after class we help each other release tension and stress," I purred. "Would you like to watch us do this for you tonight?" "Oh, yes," he groaned. Rachel arrived at 8, wearing a clothes that complemented every curve of her beautiful body. Her long red hair cascaded over her shoulders. "So this is the nephew you've been telling me about," she winked at Danny. The evening started with a few glasses on wine. Hours passed and finished in a room of love and passion. On the final morning, Rachel left saying goodbye after we shared breakfast in comfortable silence, all of us knowing how incredible last night was. Our time together was coming to an end, and we have the best time. As we waited for Rob to arrive, I felt a bittersweet pang in my heart. These few days had been a gift, a chance to as well reconnect, to understand each other in ways we hadn't before. I wished we had more time, but I was grateful for every moment we'd shared. When Rob's car pulled into the driveway, Danny turned to me, a shy but genuine smile on his face. "Thanks for everything, Aunt Jess. I didn't realize how much I needed this." I hugged him, feeling a surge of pride and affection for the person he was becoming. "Anytime, Danny. Don't be a stranger, okay?" He nodded, smiling as he climbed into the car. As I watched them drive off, I felt a quiet sense of joy and peace settle over me. Our bond had deepened in a way I hadn't expected, and I knew, no matter how far life took him, we'd always have these memories to hold on to.